Our goal is to, by the end of this period, which we're looking at getting out of here at 5 p.m., you will have created a complete file in Photoshop, a complete file in Adobe Illustrator, and a complete file in Adobe InDesign. I could teach an entire semester on each of those pieces of software. I could probably teach a 4-year course just on Photoshop. But today, you are going to be comfortable with the essential elements of Photoshop in less than 90 minutes. Let's see if I can pull it off. So first, we'll make sure that I have guest access. Could all of you please open up Photoshop on your laptops?
So my screen is black right now. That's what it's supposed to be?
No.
I don't know.
No, you told me that.
Did it go to
No,
sleep?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
That's Photoshop right
Yeah,
there.
you said.
Oh, great.
Photoshop.
So it's not actually black. It has lots of black in it.
It's a stream now.
It's
It's
a
Okay.
stream. It's totally.
Sure.
Okay, so
Perfect.
she knows.
So I need everyone to open up Photoshop and then close your laptops.
Well, we can download your program. But I don't.
Okay, that's fine. If you're downloading, that's okay. You can keep your laptop open. But everyone is going to be standing up. So put away the things that are in your lap.
Or in your way.
Uh-oh, you hear that? It went beep.
Okay.
Are we gonna need a university network for this?
Yep, you could just hook up to either University Network or Harvard Guest if you don't have an account. That's no problem.
Photoshop. Photoshop. All right, Photoshop.
Drives me crazy. Aspect ratio.
Sensei.
We're going to talk about aspect ratio.
Sensei?
Sensei Breen.
Is that you?
I'm Sensei Breen. I want to welcome you to my teaching dojo. I like to think of it as DG Dojo, which can stand for Digital Dojo, Design Dojo, Discussion Dojo, Dialogue Dojo. You decide. What I want to do, though, is to help all of us get into a design mode. So hopefully this next activity will get you away from the space where you were before you came here. So some of you just had some stress about getting software downloaded, about making sure that you were here on time, about figuring out who the other people were and how judgmental they're going to be and whether you're going to be able to express yourself in this setting. I feel all those things too. So what I like to do is always start with some form of game that's tied directly to our workshop. And I want to especially try today, myself as an instructor, as a sensei, to be transparent. Because most of you are in the educational design class. We call it instructional design, 113, the instructional design studio. So as much as I can, I want to show you what I've done to prepare for this class, and also how I could potentially improve it even within the less than 90 minutes that we have to go. So without further ado, all of us are going to play a little game called the add game. And if we're a little closer together, you don't have to be in a complete circle. Semicircle works fine. What we're going to do is go around the circle first and just say your name and one of your favorite companies in the world, okay? So we're going to do a quick go around. You're just going to introduce yourself, your name, and name one of your favorite companies, or just a company that lots of your money goes to. Maybe it's not a favorite, but you just can't stop paying them, okay?
Okay.
So we'll start over here with John.
I'm John Ellsworth, and I like Apple.
I'm Siri Talley, and I actually have a company. It's called FCDB, Fitness Competitor Database, and I spend all my money in it.
All right, fair enough. He's already promoting to us. I love it.
My name is Amber Coe, and I have a company called lovelogica.com, and 95% of my money goes into it.
My name is Marionette Patterson, and most of my money goes into Whole Foods.
Whole Foods, or as we call it in schools, whole paycheck.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Maria Valencia Devon, and U.S. Bank.
Okay.
Ooh, that's a good thing. I could have said that.
Literally.
My name is Steve Gordon, and you kind of stole my thunder. I spend more money at Whole Foods than anywhere else on the planet right now.
I'm Karen Motley, and I spent money at Kiva.
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 Yep.
Yeah, my name is Daniel Arevalo. I will say Google, but I don't invest anything in Google, so I use my money on Apple most of all.
Okay.
You're paying Google with data, that's why you're paying
Oh,
them.
that's a way to say it, yes.
So my name is Derek Breen, or Sensei Breen as I'm going by today, and most of my money locally actually goes to Micro Center, the best computer store in New England, which Marinette's going to be hearing more about after this class. So great. Now what we're going to do is in the next 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to design our own company. But we're going to do it with a few rules. It wouldn't be a game if we didn't have rules. So rule number 1 is everything you say needs to be preceded by the word yes. So we're going to brainstorm the creation of a company, but you have to start with the word yes, affirming whatever it is that someone said before you. We actually call it in improv the yes and rule. We're going to be using yes and to build on the previous thing, and we'll talk about why after the activity. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, everybody has to contribute once. Rule number 3, nobody can contribute more than once. So once you contribute, you can sit back down. So we're going to do a go-around. I'm going to direct you a little bit to make sure that you're getting everything that we need for our business plan. We're going to be creating a brand new business from scratch. So I will ask a question to start it off. Someone will answer that question. You don't have to say yes the first time. But everyone after that should be leading with yes and blah, 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 blah. So the final rule is you're not allowed to name the company until the last person standing. The last person standing is going to be naming the company. But I want you to forget that fact right now. Don't think about the name of the company. If we do this right, we will come up with a name that will live through the ages. The less we think about it, the more perfect it's going to be. Okay? So when I make eye contact and say something, that's the person that I'm choosing to start. So what I'm looking for is that certain sparkle, that certain je ne sais quoi. What is our company going to produce?
Flavored oxygen?
What?
Yes.
Build off that.
What was it? I didn't.
Flavored oxygen.
Oh.
Our company is going to produce flavored oxygen.
Yes, and that's going to keep most of the people on the planet healthy.
Great, you can both sit down. So we can build on from yes.
Do I have to raise my hand, or? Yes, and we'll make it available in environmentally friendly containers.
Yes, and it will be easy to use and well designed.
Yes, and it's gonna come in different colors.
Yes, and we will have many awesome flavors like raspberry cheesecake and flavors that have never been smelled before in this entire world.
Yes, and we will deliver it through an online system so that anybody can get it anywhere in the world.
And Daniel, what are we calling this company? First thing that comes into your mind.
Oxygen. Oxygen.
You can have a lifeline. You can call one person and look for a sparkle. If someone has an idea of the perfect name for this product, you can point to them and they will save you.
Tasty air.
Tasty air it is. Okay. So for the rest of this class, we are now in a company called Tasty Air. We focus on one product. We're going to be selling tasty oxygen to the world. So Tasty Air. Every Everybody should have a brown piece of paper, a white piece of paper, a black magic marker, and a colored marker. Is there anyone that's missing, Siri, colored marker?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first design project we have should be accomplishable by all of you. Everybody has a laptop. Everybody has a white piece of paper. In the trade, we call this cover stock. Great stuff, because you can write on it with a big, thick marker, and ideally it shouldn't show through unless you're really holding it up to the light. So what the first task that we have is to fold this piece of paper, but don't do it yet, to fold this piece of paper vertically, but perfectly. And this is the first graphic design secret I'm going to share with you today. The first of many, hopefully. And some of you are also going to be invited to share your graphic design secrets. One of the best ways to fold a piece of paper perfectly is to use a laptop. So open your laptops now, please. So what I'm going to do with my piece of paper, it should be in the front, I think, Mariana. Front, middle. Let's see. Oh, is it a slider?
There we go, slide. And clips.
So with our laptops open, we're going to hold our piece of paper horizontally. Anyone know what we call this in the graphic design world? When we hold our paper horizontally as opposed to vertically?
Landscape mode.
Landscape. Perfect for a landscape photo of the beach, of anything that doesn't involve snow right now. So what I want to do is hold it horizontally or landscape style to match the orientation of my screen. And then I'm going to place it over my keyboard. So I'm placing it over my keyboard in parallel with my screen. And what I'm going to do is fold my screen a little bit so that I'm creating a stop gap where the paper can't go past. So I'm just folding my screen just a little bit towards me so that if I push the paper forward, it won't go any further. It's right on the edge of my screen. Now I'm going to fold it over. Forward towards the screen. You want to be careful not to touch your keys. But if you do this, you should have a perfectly folded piece of paper.
Brilliant.
Then you can take it off and finish the job with your fingertips. Tip number 2, you've probably all done at one time or 5,000 times in your life. Use your fingernails on a hard surface. Run them along the edge so that it will really stay folded. Fingernails is the secret when you don't have scissors, but you want to cut something in half. I'm even going to unfold it and fold it back the other way and do my fingernails again. Nobody knew they were signing up for origami class, did they? So I've now run my fingernails over the folded center so that I can easily rip this in half. And it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if you get a B. Nope, you can't have everyone getting an A. Mine isn't even perfect, and I've been doing this for a while. So, unsurprisingly, we should end up with 2 halves of this paper. How tall is each half?
11 inches.
Louder, please.
11.
11 inches. Yeah. So we know that letter size in the United States of America is 11 inches. So how wide is each strip?
8.
Nope.
4 1/4.
You're down to a C. 4 1/4. 4 1/4.
Inches.
So much of your design is going to be about knowing the exact dimensions. Whether it's dimensions of graphics on a screen, whether it's dimensions of graphics on paper, whether it's the dimensions of a poster that you've been hired to do, or a book that you need to do for your project. So we're going to be very precise today. So I want you to take the one that looks better. Like me, I have one that's kind of jagged. I can use that later. And now I just want you to fold it in half vertically. So we have a nice little tent, like so. So with that tent, everyone hold it like I am. Left or right hand, it doesn't matter. I'm ambidextrous, so I can go either way. So we're folding it in half lengthwise to make our little tent, table tent. You've probably seen these in restaurants all over the place. Every week in undergrad, they were promoting stuff with these things. It meant they blew all over the place, and it was a disaster. I hated it. So what we're going to do now is turn it upside down. So the corner's facing the ground. And now I want you to grab your colored marker. So upside down, like this, we want to write our name right across the top. I'm going to grab my colored marker. It's funny, I was not into green until I hit 40, and then it was like my color. So I'm going to write Sensei Breen right across the top, like so. So again, it's pointing down. And I want you to do the same thing on the flip side. So your name across the top. Oh, sure.
I have to use 2 lines.
That's okay. That's okay. So I'll just do spring.
Yeah, the green is not working.
And then I want you to, oh, you need a different green? You can use this one. And we'll throw away any ones that aren't working.
That blue one's dead.
Yeah, this is niece and nephew. They totally burned these things up. Couldn't be me. And then I would like you to underline your name on both sides. So we're underlining our name. And on one side, I need you to put a question mark. So I have my name and question mark on one side. And on the other side, I'm going to put a big exclamation point. Okay? So let me demonstrate the function of these cards. Most of you probably guessed already. If you have a question, it fits right under your laptop. Okay? So keep these by your laptop. If you have a question, set it up just like this. Because that's telling not only me that you have a question, it's telling your classmates that you have a question. And I can't always get right to a question. So it could be really handy if people just kind of keep an eye out when you can. Particularly if you've just finished a task or a step. Take a breather, stand up, stretch, do a quick scan. Does anyone have a question mark up? Maybe you could help them out before I get to them. So what do you think the exclamation point's for then?
I'm available to help.
No, it's wow. I just did something so cool you have to see it on my screen right now. When you're ready to show off, exclamation point. If you're having a little bit of trouble, question mark. Very simple. Now could everyone please hold up their exclamation? Steve. Dan. Okay, and just take a moment to look at everyone's card. So I know almost nobody in this room knows everybody in this room, although some of you met maybe just before class. So, great. Look at the variety of exclamation points. Anyone else find that interesting? Everyone chose their color. Everyone did something a little bit different, their own version of an exclamation point. Except for John and Karen, who may have a little something going on the side. That's all I'm saying.
Just say that.
Okay. So everyone's clear about what we're using these for the rest of the class. This is gonna really help me. If I see a hand raised, I might actually just go over and hold this up and ask you to put it on. Really helps so that I can have some continuity. We're gonna be going at a really fast clip. It's already 4 o'clock. Now I only have 60 minutes to teach you 3 of the most complex pieces of software on the planet. But I'm up to it.
Ready.
Okay. Mine's gonna stay in exclamation point as long as possible. But I'm gonna ask that you only put those out when you genuinely have something you wanna share or something that you need help with, okay? So I've got a quote that I wanted everybody to read. I think it's familiar probably to everyone in the room. Almost everybody would have read the book or at least potentially read the quote. So keep looking at the screen and note what happens when I do this. What's different? Did anything
Much easier to
change?
read.
Easier to read. Anything else?
Contrast.
Contrast is better. Higher contrast, you could say. Is there anything you notice now that you couldn't really see when the lights were on? So we'll start with this.
The paper in the back,
Okay, so what do you notice about the paper in the back?
you can see the finer grains and, you know.
Yeah, can everybody see that there's a little bit of grain or texture on the back? It's not just a flat tan color or white. Let's go back a slide. Did anyone notice the texture before when you saw this with the lights on? It's pretty subtle, so it might have been hard, particularly in good light. So, what do you notice about the fonts on each of these slides?
Similar.
You don't have to know what font face it is, just how does this text relate to that text?
Given the same, they're both the same.
Well, what's different? Do you notice anything different between the title and the name?
Oh, one is in bold dark and the other one is clear, but with the bold, with the edges around it.
Sure. So you have just an outline for this text and you have solid text for this. But I want to point out that when I asked that question, first of all, Marionette was the only one that chimed in. So you're back up to a B. Good job. But also, everybody hesitated. Because why? You thought, well, I mean, it's the English language he's using. I recognize the individual letters. Maybe he's asking me something about the style. And I don't know about the style. If I knew about the style, I wouldn't be in this class right now. Okay. What I would argue is that these slides, by adding a textured background, which is actually sort of cardboard, in fact, it's scanned directly from the pages that you all have yourself right now. What it's doing is softening the image a little bit. It's making it a little warmer. We'll talk a bit about warm and cool. But really what I wanted to do is to create an exemplar for you. That maybe we could have a slide that's beautiful, whimsical, or emotionally engaging. So which of those 3 things do you think this slide achieves?
Whimsical.
Why, Steve?
It's just the choice of the font mostly.
Choice of font. Raise your hand if you think that's kind of like, yeah, that font makes it feel a little more playful than if it was maybe like Arial, which is a font you might all know or something. Okay, so the choice of the font actually contributes towards the feel. We're talking about emotions, kind of. Whimsy is an emotion or a style.
I was just agreeing, I kept my hand up.
You were strongly agreeing. Okay. What about beautiful? Is that too strong a word? I think it's too strong a word. I wouldn't really think of this as beautiful. Maybe intentional is a word that I would use rather than beautiful. It shows some intention. It's not just a template that somebody used. What about emotionally engaging? So I said I consider whimsy an emotion, but I think he's using that more as a style. So what about emotionally engaging? Is there anything about this slide that you find emotionally engaging?
Not the words, but just the look, you're saying.
I'm not specifically saying anything.
Oh,
Well, it's familiar. You know, the paper it's electronic, but it reminds us of the actual papers.
Sure.
That will-
So maybe there's an emotional connection to paper where we can see the grain? Or anything else? Any other way that you think anything on this slide might actually be emotionally engaging?
I think the words, I think what it says is.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
emotionally engaging.
But many of you were having trouble just now. You'd almost forgotten that these words have meaning. Because we were looking at the font. We were looking at specific terms, specific words. So I think if Daniel Pink were here, Sensei Pink as I like to call him, I think what he might say is that we are shifting back and forth between our right brain and our left brain as we're analyzing this slide. The same way that I need to shift back and forth between my left brain and my right brain when I design this slide. Does that resonate with people? So raise your hand if you really weren't thinking of the actual meaning of the words when I asked you if it was emotionally engaging. So I'm seeing more than half of the hands go up. So part of what we need to figure out, if I make the statement that all of you are already graphic designers, and you've just forgotten some of your talents, or they've been beaten out of you in class, is there a way that in the course of our time together I can help you to make less distinction between that left and right brain? Give you some strategies so that you can treat a slide holistically from both the design aesthetic and also from context and meaning. That's what we're looking for. And these are important because we're tasty air. We're going to bring this product to the world. Nobody knows right now what's missing. Everybody's breathing that untasty air. We need to actually put into their minds tasty air. Because we want them to spend the money that some of you are spending at Whole Foods on tasty air. If we can't get tasty air onto the shelves at Whole Foods, we failed. And I will fire your asses. So the tools that we're going to use today are Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. Show of hands, who's used Photoshop at all? Okay. Who's used Illustrator at all? A little bit. Who's used InDesign at all? One. Okay. So now, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. If I said that you are actually my design team for Tasty Air, put up your hands. 5 fingers means you are totally confident that you are meant to be on the design team with the skills you have right now. A fist means I think I'm in the wrong room. And you can go in between.
We're gonna say a solid
2, 3, 4. That's because you're a Hunger Games fan. Okay.
tribute.
So everyone has a hand up. Steve's holding up his phone. He's like, I don't know, but I'll Google it. Okay. Okay, great. So, very few 5s, which is what I was expecting.
I'm just confident.
Why did I choose Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign? Because A, they come from the same company, which means you only need to go to one website to download them. That's pretty cool. B, they're all attacking design from a different angle. But this is misleading, I think. Because in fact, over time, these tools have started to grow together. Each of them taking on different aspects of the other tool. To the extent, most designers have a preference for one of these tools, okay? What we're looking at today is this area right here. Is there one word that we could use to unite Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator?
Sweet.
I think synergy is the whole thing. I love that. What would be the overlap?
Sweet.
What do they all do?
S-U-I-T.
Well, sweet is on the box. Thank you for looking. Unless you meant sweet as in sweet.
Sweet.
But at a simplistic level, aren't all of these contributing towards design? So I think the word I would put in there is design. If I'm a designer, typically I need to have these three tools in my toolbox. There are other tools, but I would say most people are not going to argue, certainly no one is going to argue that as a designer you need to be fluent in Photoshop. Few people are going to argue that you need something other than Illustrator. Illustrator needs to be in that skills category. InDesign, that's a little more debatable. There is a direct competitor to InDesign. Anyone tell me what it is?
Quark.
Starts with a Q, Quark Express. Quark Express is a direct competitor to Adobe InDesign. And I don't know how they've stayed afloat. Because what Adobe is really good at is buying out every competitor on earth. Anyone that's ever competed in a substantial way with anything but InDesign, Adobe bought them or killed them. With the exception of this little thing called GIMP, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. What happened when I moved these circles?
Colors changed.
Blended. What's blend mean?
One over the other made a new color.
Okay.
They overlap.
What about this area?
Well, it's one over the other, not all, right?
So what happens when we put all over each other?
They create white.
It's blank.
Anybody surprised by that? Is it blank? Blank is an appropriate response. It looks empty. We think of white as empty. But in fact, the combination of these three colors in the computer world gives us white. That's weird. So that's the first new concept for most of you today. Why did I choose green, red, and blue? Let me restate that. Why did I choose red, green, and blue?
That's what all the pixels in the combination of all those three colors will make any color in this one.
Because they all come out really bright on that.
Primary, is that what you're looking for? RGB.
That should look familiar to most of you. So these are the three colors that make up all other colors in computers. Why? Why these three colors? Why are there only three primary colors? Why isn't this one of those colors? When I learned primary colors, my art teacher said they're red, yellow, and blue. To this day, that haunts me.
What's the
I've been doing
difference?
graphic design for over 20 years, and I still get thrown by this. You know why? Anyone ever mixed?
Oh, green and yellow.
What happens when you mix these in Play-Doh?
Brown. Everything makes
No,
brown.
no, if you mix just blue and yellow in Play-Doh,
Oh, blue and yellow.
It's green.
yellow and blue makes green. That's the one, I mean, that's like one of those
Remember that.
memes, right? Yellow and blue makes green. What happens if you mix green and red?
You get purple, you get blue.
Yeah.
We got a cheat sheet, by the way, guys. Right.
Green and red make a lighter green.
So these are actually mimicking the blending of the colors themselves. We're going to be looking at how to blend in Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. Core concept, blending colors. But let's do this for a second. So I'm going to go to present. Five fingers if you think that's a pretty cool, compelling image, way to show interrelationship between three different pieces of software. Closed fist if you're like, come on, you could put a little thought into this. Okay, so 4 to 5s and 1 stand up is like, you haven't fooled me. I want my money back. So this was created actually in InDesign. This image that we're looking at, when I escape presentation mode here, and I'm moving things around, I'm doing that in Adobe InDesign. I'm gonna do my best today to only use the tools that you're learning. But we're running out of time. So 45 minutes have gone by, we haven't even started using Photoshop yet. And our company, time is money. So everybody please bring Photoshop to the forefront. Open your laptops, open up Photoshop. Let me do the same. Let me hide everything else. So I have to remember to start recording my screen for the students who aren't here.
Or push like the minimize. There we go.
Okay, so Adobe Photoshop. I want to point out something that Marionette said a few minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. My screen is black. By default, Photoshop doesn't do anything. You open it up, and it is, in fact, black. Or I think of it as empty. There's nothing there. It's showing limitless possibilities, but it's not going to do anything for you. Photoshop doesn't want to make design easy for you. Just look at the palette. Some of you are going to see 2 tools, a column of 2 tools on the left. Many of you will see a column of 1 tool depending on which version you're using. Most of you probably see these tools with a black background. Unless, like me, you're still using an earlier version. I'll try to do a little bit of back and forth. I'll show you some stuff in the new version. The tools we're using are identical across all versions going back at least 12 to 14 years. So it really doesn't matter which version you're using. But look at all these tools. You want to know what's crazy? That's not even all those tools. Notice, let's go to the second tool here. The one that looks like a sort of dotted square, dotted line square. See how it has a little triangle on the lower right side? That means more tools. So for almost every one of the tools that you see here, there are 3 or 4 more related or grouped together tools. That's a lot of tools, folks. And there's no way that I can go through all of these tools in 20 minutes. In fact, there's no way I can go through all of these tools in 1 semester and have you actually understand them and be able to transfer that skill and use it either in Photoshop or in other applications. But what I can do in 20 minutes is introduce you to the most important daily use type tools. So we're going to be learning about a few of the tools in Photoshop, a few of the options that we have under menus. We're going to look at a few palettes that either give us additional information or enable us to do certain things with our image. So go ahead and open your web browser of choice. I'm using Google Chrome. Sorry, I had to reboot.
It says styles.
And then you're fine.
No styes in your eyes. Okay, so you don't have to go through what I'm going through. but I have to go through what I'm going through.
Oh, that's cute.
So what we're looking for, I'm sorry the network is wildly slow. Now I can click. Please enter this in your address bar in your web browser of choice. goo.gl for Google. Capital A, capital P, lowercase v, 05, lowercase g.
Is it 0?
Unless it's an O.
It's
It might
an
be
O.
an O. And that drives me crazy that they would use O and or 0 in this case.
Capital O.
Is it O? Is it an O?
Yeah,
Is it an O?
it's capital O.
That should bring you to this page.
Keeps wanting client management system here at Harvard. Can I log in as a guest?
If you're having trouble connecting, enter google.com in your address line and it'll bring up the permission dialog. You can then just click the button and then you'll be able to.
Oh, hold on. It's a lowercase v.
Could you please show that Earl again where we're supposed to be? Because
Oh,
I'm
yes.
something
I'm
completely
sorry.
different.
Yep.
It won't let me do anything unless I log into the client
Steve,
management
go to
system.
google.com.
It,
Connect to Harvard Guest in your Wi-Fi settings.
says I'm connected to Harvard, but
Fortunately, Guest is almost as fast as non-guest. I'm on Guest right now. So once you're there, I'd like you to go ahead and download cardboardbg.jpg. So I'm just going to click on cardboardbg.jpg. For me, because I clicked on it, it loads as its own page. If it does that, that's okay. You can just do File, Save As. And save it to desktop, or if you want to create a folder for the workshops, that's fine. A place where you know where it is. We're going to be using this file quite a bit today. Cardboard-bg. All it is a scanned version of the brown piece of paper you have at your desk. And once you've downloaded it, please open Cardboard VG JPG in Photoshop. I will do the same. Go to Photoshop, File, Open. Sure.
I can't seem to get these to work out.
Let's see what's going on. They might actually be. Do you mind if I use your tracker?
Yeah. That's okay.
So they are actually in your applications folder too. This was throwing everybody earlier. So if you go to applications and then you can drag it into your
Okay.
go to Photoshop and open up that image.
It's a relatively new addition.
Open.
Okay. So then, now we're just opening this up.
Yep, so you're opening Photoshop. And you want to open that cardboard right in Photoshop.
And then you're gonna open and then find the file on your desk. Just open.
Does it matter if my tool palettes are different than yours for now?
Nope. No, the tools that we use are all in the same place, fortunately. They just look a little bit different in terms of
No,
layout.
go back to desktop.
Okay, so those of you that have, can everyone look at me and make your eyes sparkle if you have the paper open in Photoshop?
How do you?
So what's the point of Photoshop? It's right in the name, right? I mean, it's one of the few pieces of software that the title has become a recognized word in society. What does it mean when you Photoshop someone?
Take pictures of them?
You change
Nope.
them digitally.
You mark up or edit the picture.
Yeah, can you be more specific? If you heard somebody Photoshopped Michelle Obama, what'd they do?
You remix the image in a way, you edit it.
Yeah,
Altered.
I think alter is a better word when it comes to photographs. I think that's the general thought. As designers, absolutely that's what we're doing. We're editing, we're changing, we're modifying. Photoshop is the go-to place if you have a photograph that's either been taken with a digital camera or scanned, and you want to alter it in some way. You want to edit it in some way. So for now, I just wanted us all to start with a fairly simple image. So the image that we have is cardboard. The very thing that I was using as the background. Now let's zoom in. So all the way near the bottom, you should see a magnifying glass. One of the core tools. That magnifying glass is in every single Adobe software, even the ones we're not going to cover today. So the very first tool, magnifying glass, what's going to happen when you click with that magnifying glass?
Zoom in.
How can I tell how far I'm zooming in when I use the magnifying glass? Anyone notice?
The very top
So right there
border.
at the bottom.
More specific.
Top border.
Where at the bottom or where at the top? You're both right. It's actually showing
Bottom
a few
right,
different
bottom
places.
left-hand corner of the image, or the
Bottom
the
left-hand
center
corner, which you
top.
can't see because I have really low resolution because of the
No, it's there.
projector.
It's just-
Yeah, it's down here somewhere. Hi. See how it says 600% at the bottom left-hand corner? And then Karen also said there was another place where she saw it?
top
No, the
center.
bottom corner.
Oh,
is
you
what
saw
I
it
said.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. There's someone also top center, it's telling me 600%. There's actually a third place, because Photoshop does everything in duplicate or triplicate. All the way near the top, I actually have this 600%. 3 different places where it's telling me how zoomed in I am. So it must be fairly important to know how zoomed in you are.
No.
But what does that mean? What does it mean when I'm zooming all the way in? And can anyone figure out how to zoom out with the same tool?
Shift key.
Shift?
No.
Nope.
Function.
Shift didn't work.
Control. Option. Option.
Option. If you hold down the Option key, and I'm never totally confident it's going to work on PCs, because there's some slight differences between the shortcuts on a Mac versus a PC. So all we're doing is zooming in. We're just using that same magnifying glass, zooming in by clicking, holding the Option key and clicking to zoom out. But let's zoom as far in as we can. So I'm going to click once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. What's the most that I can zoom in?
3200%.
3,200%. And what do I see at 3,200%?
Bunch of squares. It's pixelated.
What's the word that you said, Steve?
Pixelated.
Pixelated. So we're all looking at these pixels, these squares. Why can't we zoom in anymore? Because the pixel is the atom of graphics. But what do you notice about pixels?
Where did you get that? Where did
Its
you get
entire square is the
You're
same
zooming
color.
in, zoom in all the way with your magnifying glass. Just choose that magnifying glass and you click, 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 click until you see some big squares. Tell me some things you notice about those squares.
They look
Different
like
time, different
tiles.
colors.
Different tones, different colors, what'd you say?
They look like tiles.
They look like tiles, they absolutely look like tiles. Anything else?
Like each square is all the same color, right? So it's not like half the square is
Only
color.
one color within a square.
Right.
Yes, that's one of the key points.
There's no
What
pattern.
about the relationship of the squares to each other?
Yeah, there's no pattern. I don't see a pattern.
So the one thing that people didn't mention is probably too obvious to mention, which is that all the squares are exactly the same size.
Oh, that's true.
So the fact that all the squares are the same size and that each square only contains one color, those are really at the heart of what a pixel is. The smallest information, the smallest amount of color you can have in computer graphics. In fact, how many people ever played a video game on the Atari 2600 or in the arcades that have very sort of blocky graphics? The reason they had blocky graphics is because way back when, computers could only handle displaying a certain number of pixels at a time. So let's say when Space Invaders came out, maybe they could only display 256 of these blocks at one time. And so everything had to be built out of square blocks. So if you look at Space Invaders, say, we'll go to Images, to Filter. See what I mean? They're all made of equal size, equal color squares. All the squares are the same color. All the squares are the same size, and they each only can contain one color. So this was the best you could do when I was 7 or 8 years old with computer graphics. It's the best you could possibly have. A few years before that, this was the best you could do with computer graphics. All you could do is display white graphics. You could not even display black graphics. Black was no light, white was light. On, off, digital. Yes, no. So in Photoshop, if we're going to be getting at the essence of some of the differences between Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign, and I think it's really helpful to have those 3 circles in your mind. We're going to be drawing those 3 circles in a second. In Photoshop, almost everything is made up of little squares called pixels. In the earlier versions of Photoshop, this is all they could do. Anything you did in Photoshop was about altering these pixels. So since we're zoomed all the way in, let's choose our next tool. Can everybody find the first paintbrush? There are a few paintbrush icons. We're looking for the one right below the Band-Aid. At least in my version. It might be slightly different in your version.
Does it say B next to it?
Yep, it should say B. If you hover your cursor over it, it will say brush. That's for brush tools. So any of the tools, if you're not sure what they are, you can put your cursor over it and it will tell you. So you want, yep, paint tool. Brush tool, I'm sorry.
Well, let me change
Now that brush tool has a little triangle next to it. What does that mean?
more tools.
More tools. And in fact, we want a tool that's within that brush tool. So I'm going to click and hold my trackpad button down. And what we want to choose is the pencil tool. So I chose the pencil tool, and I want to make sure, all the way at the bottom of my palette, that there's a black square in the foreground and a white square in the background. So I have the pencil tool, black, and like me, your tool should be approximately the same size as those squares. Does anyone not have what I'm pointing to on my screen right now? So if you've chosen the pencil tool, you've got a square, hollow square, same size.
Oh, I got it now.
You got it?
I
Awesome.
got it.
Okay.
And if the pencil.
So now I want you to try to write your initials using the trackpad. And I'd like to give you another secret from the graphic design world. I find you can be much more precise with a trackpad than with a mouse if you do this simple thing. Use the hand that you do not write with. If I write with my right hand, I'm going to use my left hand, and the index finger on my left hand is going to press the button on my trackpad. So I'm pressing the button on my trackpad, and then I'm using index or middle finger on the hand that I draw with to actually write. And if I want to go to a different part of the screen, I'll just release with the left hand and draw with the right to move my cursor. So I'm holding with my left index finger and kind of painting or drawing with my right finger.
I lost the little box.
So see if you can do your initials.
It's just loaded. Run away when I went down there.
So you want to do this. You want to hold this button with your left hand, and then you can
Oh.
go with your right. It's just like fingerprinting. Try it. You really are finger painting.
How do you remove a box that you've colored?
So you made it black, but you don't want it to be black.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if you can undo the last stroke by doing Control Z or Apple Z on the apple, and that will undo what you've just done. I'm not going to tell you yet how you can undo more than once. So right now we're just doing our initials. And if you're as anal as I am, they'll all line up. That is not necessary, but it's how my brain works. Everybody have their initials? 2 letters fine, you don't have to do 3. Once you have your initials, it should look, doesn't it kind of look like the graphics from the age of Space Invaders? Very simple. We call this pixel art. Some people still prefer to draw and paint this way. Entire video games are still made using pixel art. But let's select our magnifying glass again.
Okay.
So I'm selecting magnifying glass, using Option, click to zoom out once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Let's zoom out to 500%. Then I'm going to zoom out all the way to 100%. What do you notice?
Doesn't look that pixelated.
Everyone hear what Steve said? Can everyone speak up a little bit more so everyone can hear? Steve, could you say that again?
It doesn't look so pixelated at 100%.
So that's it?
That's it. It looks teeny tiny.
Is that the same way for everyone? Do you notice how when you zoom out it actually looks almost decent? It doesn't look pixelated when you zoom out. But if I zoom back in, click, 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 I don't even have to go all the way to 3200. In fact, probably at about 200 I can already start to notice the pixelization. So the secret of bitmap graphics, we call them bitmap, because each pixel represents 1 bit, 1 piece of information. It has color, and that's all it needs to keep track of. So bitmap is often abbreviated to this. BMP. You might see some files, particularly if you look back at graphics from many years ago on a PC, they'll end in .bmp, a format that says, I'm made out of pixels, as opposed to anything else. One of the most important takeaways for Photoshop is the idea that you are effectively painting with squares. When you're changing things in Photoshop, you're changing the color of squares. Period. That's Photoshop, literally. And we're going to learn a few more things that you can actually do with Photoshop. But essentially what Photoshop does at its core is changes the color of little squares. That's it. I mean, it can change them in a ton of different ways. You can do really cool things by overlapping squares. But why might it be important to know how zoomed in I am when I'm designing and working in Photoshop? If Photoshop is all about just changing the color of squares, and if the further I'm zoomed out, the less I can notice that they're squares, why is it important to know whether I'm at 50%, 25%, 400%? What does the percent actually mean?
Does it mean how it's gonna look when you, on the paper, or if you print it out or something, when you download it?
Kind of. Not exactly, but kind of. You're kind of getting what it is. In the case of Photoshop, in the old days, when you were at 100%, that's what it would look like on a computer screen when it was opened. So let's go back to our website, shall we? Chrome. DG Dojo. Notice, by default, I use that same image as the background for the website. It should look basically the way that it looked in Photoshop at 100%. So it's really important for me to know if I'm designing something for a screen, then opening it in Photoshop at 100% is going to show me what someone else will see on their screen. Sounds obvious? Very tricky for students. Very tricky. Because in this day and age, you're rarely designing for just a screen. What else do we have to design for?
Mobile, iPad.
iPads, which has changed everything about designing for a screen. What else?
The phone.
The phone. We need something that can be legible at a certain size, that has the right contrast in different light levels, something we never really thought about before. And what about
Printed.
Video.
Yeah.
You're both right. And I wasn't looking for video when I held this up. Video and print. Video has a certain resolution, a certain size. How many people have HDTV now? Almost everybody. HDTV, mostly when you're buying an HDTV, what do you need to know? What's one of the big selling points of an HDTV other than cost and brand? Like, what's the label? There are a couple different flavors of HDTV.
I mean, like 720p, 1080p.
1080i. Have you heard those numbers? Anyone know what those actually mean?
Pixels that are present across the screen. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you're buying a television now, you actually have to know what a pixel is. Or not. You can trust the salesperson. Give them your money.
I didn't know that.
So when you're buying a television set, now pixel dimension, or what we call resolution, or you might hear dots per inch, or points per inch, DPI, PPI. That's a big selling point for televisions. So what's the difference between 720V or 720p and 1080i, say? Does anyone know what that number actually is?
Yeah.
What's the 720 or the 1080?
It's how many pixels within a certain amount of space.
Nope.
No. It's the amount of lines on it.
Everyone go to Photoshop and do File, New.
I used to know all this stuff. Photoshop.
So File, New, most of you probably see inches there. I'm going to click on inches and change that to pixels.
Pixels. Pixels per line.
It's giving us width, height, resolution, color mode, and background. I don't care about background. I only want to look at width, height, resolution, and color mode. Now, until just recently, I could make the following statement and be correct. All screens in the world are 72 pixels per inch. Until Apple introduced some products and decided that they were going to make screen resolution one of the biggest selling points, every monitor, every digital television had the same resolution, 72 pixels per inch. 72 ppi or in the printing world, 72 DPI, either pixels per inch, user pixels, or on a page, dots per inch. This is the most important concept in Photoshop and what trips up so many of my students. You need to know what device you're designing for. And by extension, you need to know what devices you might need to support in the future when you're doing anything in Photoshop. So when I design this background image, let's go back. I'm going to click Cancel. And I'm going to Image, Image Size. You don't actually have to do this. I'm just going to Image Size to get some information here. 1440 pixels by 900 pixels. That's the size of my background image, my cardboard. 1440 by 900, 72 pixels per inch. Do those numbers look familiar to anybody in the room using a Macintosh right now? If they don't, let me hide Photoshop for a minute. And I'm going to go to my monitor icon at the top. Notice 1440 by 900. So what does that mean? I'll just tell you that's the preferred resolution for my laptop. Right now I've shifted to 1024 because of the way that it's sending out pixels really through that projector. So what's that 1440 by 900? Why is that the same number here and in Photoshop? Why would I design an image that's 1440 by 900?
Because it's a standard size screen.
Kind of.
It's the resolution for a standard screen.
Not exactly. It is a standard size resolution. But there are many different resolutions for laptops. In fact, those of you with PCs, which is nobody, you're kidding me. One. Sure. If you run a PC, chances are that's going to be 1366 by 720. That's the default resolution. Wait a minute, 720. Where did we hear that 720 before?
How did you get that box, that image size box? What did you click on?
So I did the image menu and went to image size. 1440 by 900 here. And I just said if this was a PC, my resolution might be 1366 by 720. Where did we hear that 720 number a few minutes ago? What's that?
720p when we were talking about TVs.
720p. 720 is a common number here. What's that referring to?
Height.
When you buy an HD TV, that 720 is telling you how many pixels vertically. Either 720 pixels vertically or 1080 vertically. So what's the difference? Why should you pay more money for that 1080 versus the 720?
Higher definition.
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
What do you mean by higher definition?
Well, it's like lines of resolution. If you have, it's like, it's sort of using the expression like when you were zooming in and saw those boxes bigger and bigger and bigger, if you're getting 1080 lines of pixels in the same amount of space that you were only getting 720, it means you're getting smaller pixels, and if you're getting smaller pixels, it means you're getting better resolution. You're getting higher definition.
Isn't it? So yes. Could I demonstrate that by just doing this? When you buy a 720 screen, it might look like this. Let's say that's 720. And let's say this is 1080. What's the difference? Smaller. Well, what did we say happens when we zoom out far enough with that jagged text?
It gets crisper, clearer.
Yes. Your TV also uses little colored squares. Everything is made out of squares. The smaller the squares are, the better the illusion that they're not squares. Got it? So Photoshop is all about changing the color of squares. So if I wanted to use a select tool, remember the first tool that we clicked to see other tools underneath it was this rectangular marquee, which I still have to call the select tool. That's what it used to be called. That tool lets me select an area So I'm going to use that tool, click and drag to select an area, and I'm going to hit delete or backspace. And it's saying, do you want to fill that area with foreground color? I'll say yes, I'll just click OK, and what's going to happen?
What is this content aware?
It's filling it with the foreground color.
And that's okay, if it doesn't, you can change that to foreground color. It might say background or pattern or fill or something like that. What's going to happen if I zoom in on one corner of what I just did in Photoshop, where everything's made of bits? Pixels. I'm going to zoom in on that corner. What's going to happen? What are we going to see? Eventually it's going to turn into squares, but it's always going to be sharp. If you're creating something that's square, cool. I don't have to do anything special, right? Because squares make squares. You can have a nice corner on a square. You don't have to worry about it being smooth. But what's going to happen if I do a circle?
It might not
So instead of
be-
doing a square, I'm going to click and drag for that elliptical shape. Do a circle. Do backspace. Foreground color. Now I'm going to use the same magnifying glass and zoom in. Let's see what happens on the edge. Zooming in to my circle. What's happening?
The edges are getting jagged.
That's Photoshop. Photoshop is all about you changing the color of squares and making sure you can zoom out far enough so that you don't notice they're squares. And that's why if we look at this image here, which just looks like a mosaic, if I zoom out, eventually it becomes my grandparents' house. All made of little colored squares. So that's Photoshop. You can explore all of these tools on your own. Hovering over a tool tells me what that tool is going to do. So if Photoshop is all about changing those squares, let me just do something really cool. I'm going to use my select, drag it around that house, and use a filter. Because a lot of people, when they think of Photoshop, they're thinking of something like this, right? Where you can take a photograph and make it look more like a comic book or something. But if I zoom in, eventually I'm still going to see that it's just squares. Let's go ahead and open Illustrator and see what's different between Illustrator and Photoshop. Why, if I can change the color of squares in Photoshop, and I just said all screens are made up of squares, why do we need a different program for doing illustration versus editing a photograph? Well, in Illustrator, I'm going to create a new document. I'll just leave the settings that are there. So I just did File New, left the settings that are there. And instead of using a pencil tool, which is there, if I use the pencil tool, I can draw. But it's not going to do what it did in Photoshop. The pencil tool is not the basic tool of Illustrator, as it is in Photoshop.
Illustrator is now online.
It should be. We're going to have to go back an extra one. So hold up.
Okay, I don't know what's happening.
That happens because Microsoft always wants to be open when Photoshop or any of those is, because they feel bad because they don't have cool enough design software. So we're going to go
Oh, I don't have Illustrator or Dreamweaver.
This program files, Adobe, and then there should be a folder for Illustrator, and on the PC, unfortunately, all kinds of other stuff.
In Illustrator,
There's-
according to this up here, but my Photoshop stuff is still up.
So
Did you minimize the Photoshop?
So I have 2 to 3 minutes to show you what's different about Illustrator versus Photoshop. So I need everyone's attention.
It's in, yeah, it's in.
So I need everyone's attention. If I said that the paintbrush is the original core tool for Photoshop, I'm sorry, the pencil was what we started with. It evolves into the paintbrush, which is just a little bit smoother, but still painting with squares when you zoom in a lot. What's different about Illustrator? In Illustrator, rather than painting with a paintbrush, the essential tool in Illustrator is the pen. So everyone see if you can find the pen. It looks like a quill, like a, I'm sorry, like a, what do we call that kind of pen?
I can't remember.
I'm blanking now. Like a pen that you have to dip in ink.
Yeah, inkwell pen.
Inkwell pen,
That's a good.
Fountain pen, fountain pen, fountain.
fountain pen, sure.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna click on that pen tool. Now try drawing with the pen tool the way that you drew with the pencil in Photoshop and see what happens. Click. I'll do the same technique. I'm gonna click with my left and paint with my, but wait a minute. If I click and, it's definitely not doing what I expected it to do. It's not really letting me intuitively paint with my finger the way that I could in Photoshop. Anyone notice that? What's it do? What happens when you click and drag? What happens when you click and try to draw something?
It curves the line.
Well, even before that, so let me go back. Yes, we end up with curves. So I select my pen tool, I click, and I drag. What's happening when I drag before anything even?
You get 2 points.
It's stretching a
What's
line.
this? Yeah, 2 points with a line between them. And I can, no matter how far I go, I'm not really drawing anything. I just have these, almost like handlebars. I'm gonna let go, click somewhere else and drag, then I get a curve.
Oh, I see the pen.
A kind of funky curve. If I click again somewhere else and drag, I get another curve. Click again and drag, another curve. Click back to the origin point and drag, I actually get a shape. So if I deselect it, that is not what I expected. That is not a tool that you would be familiar with if you didn't do professional graphic design at some point, whether it's Flash or Illustrator. There's a similar tool in Photoshop that was eventually introduced. But let's try zooming in. So why don't you try clicking and dragging. So I'm going to click a point, click another point, drag, click another point, drag, click another point, drag, and eventually go back to that original point and click once to close it. Then I want to grab my magnifying glass and zoom in on my shape, on one area of my shape. So I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to zoom in. Illustrator lets me go to 6,400%. And what do you see at 6,400% on that line?
Smooth.
Where are the pixels? Where are those little squares? In Photoshop, we could only zoom in 3,200%. In Illustrator, I can zoom in twice as far. But where are the pixels?
There aren't any.
No pixels. Core difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. Everything fundamentally in Photoshop, at least until a few years ago when they started adding all kinds of other stuff into it, but pretty much Photoshop is about changing the color of pixels, color of those tiny little squares, and making sure that you have a high enough resolution that you're zoomed out and you don't see the squares. You see a nice sharp image like my grandparents' house. Illustrator is totally different. What Illustrator is doing,
Looking for a piece of rope?
no. Now we don't have time for rope. Bitmaps are gone. There's no bitmap in Illustrator. I'm not creating bitmaps in Illustrator. I'm not creating images out of little squares. I'm creating vector graphics. What's the difference between vector graphics and bitmap graphics? We saw one.
It's scalable.
Scalable. You can zoom into any amount. If you're doing a logo for Tasty Air and you create it in Illustrator, you don't have to worry how big it's going to be eventually. If you want it on a billboard, no problem. You could use the same logo that you designed in Illustrator on a billboard or on your business card. It's going to be perfectly sharp. Why? Because what vector graphics are fundamentally is instructions on how to draw a curve. Not very exciting, right? what excites me is that this curve is mathematical instead of graphical. So that when you print this on a laser printer, you're actually giving instructions to the printer on how to draw a curve. That's kind of cool. Has anyone ever heard the term postscript? A postscript printer. Generally, what kinds of printers are described as postscript?
High
Inkjet or laser?
laser.
Good guess.
And
Laser printers. Laser printers actually have a head that moves inside. It's a laser that's being moved around. Anyone remember the original printers, which we called plotters, where you could actually see a pen moving around and drawing a shape? Because it's using math to describe the curve, that means that you could go all around that shape. It doesn't have to do what an inkjet printer does, which is this. Inkjet printer is printing every little square. What do we call those squares?
Pixels.
I bought into it. No, points. I mentioned that one in passing, so I didn't expect anyone to get it. Pixels on a screen, points on a page. But have you ever noticed you're reading a book or a workbook or something and an image is really pixelated? It's fuzzy in the book. That's because somebody used Photoshop instead of Illustrator for that image. Or they took a photograph and the resolution was too low for the amount of points that you could put in a book. You can print very high resolution on a page. Most people will start printing 300 dots per inch as opposed to what's our screen resolution on almost all screens in the world?
72.
72 dots per inch. Certainly you've had a photograph you've seen on a website, you tried to print it, it looks like crap. Sorry, I should be more articulate. It looks like crap when you print it. Because the resolution doesn't match directly from the screen to the page. So Illustrator is going to let us do our logo. I'm going to zoom out here. The next most important tool in Illustrator, maybe the most important tool, is actually the type tool, the T. I'm going to click on the letter T, drag, and type the name of our company. Tasty Air. Change the point size to 60. Change the font to something pretty. Boost up that size even more. Now, because this is just a curve, watch what I can do with that curve. Let's say that we want some kind of funky shape for our logo. I could either try to redraw it, but did you notice how tricky it was to get the shape that you really wanted? You have to think ahead. Like, who thinks 2 or 3 curves ahead in a round shape? I don't. I've been doing this for a long time. But if I click on my fountain pen, it's just called the pen tool, I have other options, which I know from my little triangle, and I'm going to go to Convert Anchor Point tool. It's a very interesting tool. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can really see what this does. Convert Anchor Point. I'm going to click anywhere on my path. We call it a path because it's instructions as opposed to an actual shape. So I'm going to click. Let's find an anchor point. How about... That's cheap. Let's do this. Let's select.
It's under down the where do you point the Q?
What's that?
It's under the A. There is an anchor point.
Under here. Thank you. And I can't see at this resolution. So that point, anyone see what happened when I clicked on the actual anchor point? I'm going to undo it. So what Daniel noticed is when I mouse over it, it's showing me where each of the points where I originally clicked are. They're called anchor points. They're the anchor that holds that shape together. So if I just click on that point with convert, watch what happens. Click. What did it do?
Change the shape.
Went from this to this. We won't worry about the terminology right now, but it changed the shape. I'm going to undo that. Instead of just clicking, I'm going to click and drag. And what's it doing now?
Stretching and changing the shape.
How would we refer to that? Let's actually make it a solid color to really make it obvious what it's doing. What am I doing? I'm grabbing one end of that handlebar. I don't think of that as drawing, I think of it as sculpting. I'm actually taking this shape as if it was a piece of clay or the wire that you have on your desk. And I'm actually changing the shape of that with those handlebars, or what we call control points. I'm going to change the color. I'm just double clicking on that black. I want to get a nice dark red, which I'm really partial to. And I'm going to reshape it until it sort of gives me a feel of some kind of graphic We're totally out of time, so I'm not going to get too fancy with this, but let's just pretend I spent a few more minutes.
Cloud of air that you're sucking in.
Yeah, if I had a little more time, I think what I would do is actually add some more points, some more of those anchor points, and just move them around a bit to give us something that looks a little more like a cloud, maybe. Get the general idea? But if I zoom in as far as I want, it's always going to be perfectly sharp. That's Illustrator as opposed to Photoshop. So we're over 5. That means it's okay if you need to pack up and run away as fast as you can. But if you have a couple more minutes, I can condense InDesign into about 2 tools that make it totally different from the others. So that's Illustrator. So what about InDesign? Well, we actually started with InDesign. As I said, I created these in InDesign. The biggest difference about InDesign as of 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, before they started trying to put all the tools in all the software for some ungodly reason, thinking, oh, well, if you buy Photoshop, you can have all the tools of Illustrator and InDesign. But we still want you to buy Illustrator and InDesign, we just haven't figured out why. I know, we'll make the tools really hard to find and use in Photoshop. So then you still need Illustrator and you still need InDesign. It'll work. So why do we need InDesign? If we're using Photoshop for what? Fundamentally, what do we say we're doing with Photoshop?
Painting with squares.
Yeah, we're altering photos, we're painting with squares. We're changing the color of squares. What are we doing with Illustrator?
Drawing smooth curves and lines.
Smooth curves and lines, instructions, as opposed to an image that's been captured by nature. So what's left for InDesign to do then?
Lay it out on a page? I don't know.
I mean, let's open InDesign, and let's do File New and see what it says. File New Document. Maybe this will give us a hint.
Lay out on a page?
Anything different from when we created a new document in Photoshop or a new document in Illustrator? It's a lot of stuff. I don't need you to understand each of the things. I just want you to pay attention to this, right near the top. What's this all about? Number of pages, start page, facing page. What if I change the number of pages to 480? Click OK. Takes a little while, but that is a lot of pages. And I'm going to bring up the Pages palette. Palettes are even more important in InDesign than they are in Photoshop. So I'm starting with a palette rather than a tool in InDesign. So look at the Pages palette. What do I have now? Unsurprisingly, I have 480 pages. When we created a new document, we opened that document in Photoshop and we created a new document in Illustrator. How many pages did we have? Do we even talk about pages?
Nope.
So what's the core difference between InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator? If Illustrator is for creating perfect shapes, rounded shapes, graphics, illustrations, Photoshop is just for taking an image that's been taken out of nature and change the color of those little squares to make it look different, to make Michelle Obama frown instead of smile. What's InDesign all about?
Bringing it to life.
Printed page?
Great answer, and right in a way that I can't explain today. Because you can actually do full-blown animation in InDesign, which is bizarre. I heard something else.
Printed page?
Printed page.
Yeah, printed
S is the
documents.
important thing for InDesign. Photoshop for editing a photograph, Illustrator for editing a logo or an illustration, InDesign for creating an entire book. Really for creating anything that's using paper in unique ways. So if I wanted to create a brochure, which is the hands-on thing I would have loved to have done if we had 3 hours instead of 90 minutes, what we would do is start by bringing maybe a photograph into Photoshop and altering it in some way. Maybe, I'll give an example, when I was a lead designer for a hammocks company, I had the task of taking all the photographs for the summer catalog. The problem was, we had to take the photographs in February so that the catalog could be printed in time for the summer season. So what's the problem when you take photographs of hammocks outside in February? Even if there's no snow, what's the grass look like?
It doesn't look green.
Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not green. So you think I did a little photoshopping for that catalog? Brought the image in with the yellow grass, made it green. Changed the color of those squares. And you didn't even know it. You still went into Pier 1 and bought that hammock and you thought, ooh, I want that feeling of green grass. In Illustrator, I designed the logo for Twin Oaks Hammocks so that it would be sharp, whether it was on a billboard, a truck, or that catalog, or the website. And then in InDesign, I could create the 24, 46-page catalog. Really what InDesign is about is not creating images, but placing them. So now let me go back to Illustrator. I'm going to save our logo. I actually want to, let's zoom out a little bit. I just want to add a colored edge to it. So I'm going to change the color of the edge to black, which is boring, but, and let's change the thickness of that line, or what we call the stroke. Whoa, not to 2 inches. It's 2.125. Okay, so that's our logo. Not bad considering it was done in seconds. I'm going to save it. Adobe Illustrator format is fine. Save it into our workshop. Save. Got to go back to Photoshop. I'm going to zoom out. And let's just grab our cardboard. And I'm going to undo all the stuff that I did, because I just want that cardboard background. I'm going to save it as a Photoshop document. When we do the web design workshop, we're going to talk about the difference between kinds of graphics, JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, and .swf, which is a vector format that lets you bring vector graphics in for a logo, resize them. We'll stick to Photoshop for now. Go to InDesign, cover of our brochure for our new company. Let's change the layout. What do we call it when we have it on its side instead of up and down? It's telling me that right here when I keep my cursor over it, so you're all getting the terminology. I like that. Landscape should change in my preview window. I'm on the first page, double-clicked on that first page. Now I'm going to do File Place, which is unique to InDesign and Quark. The idea of you want to place other graphics. We're not importing. Importing is different. Importing usually replaces something that you have open or opens up an additional thing. Placing it is just like taking it and placing it on the table. It's there, and I can place something else over it or beneath it or beside it. So I'm going to place my cardboard paper PSD, and then I can drag it if I wanted to cover my entire page. It's actually bigger than my page, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to bring in my logo from Illustrator by doing the same thing. Place, Control D. And it looks like I saved that in the wrong place. So let's go back and be more careful. I didn't actually finish, so let's Make sure that I say, yes, that color scheme is okay. InDesign, place, I didn't title it, so it's just untitled. Voila. Tasty air. And can someone give me a motto for our company? I'm going to use the type tool here the same way I did in Illustrator. You'll notice a lot of the tools are identical. Same icon, same name. Someday, if I have time, I'll be able to tell you how many of them act totally differently in different software packages from the same company. Drives me crazy as a teacher. But I've got the type tool. What's a good slogan for Tasty Air?
Saves lives.
Breath of fresh air.
That's the first half. Saves lives
Sweet breath.
with a brush, with a, what was the fresh air thing? Saves lives
I said a
with
breath of fresh
a
air
breath
or a sweet breath
of fresh air. We'll increase the size of my text. Use the same font because I like consistency. And then I'm going to go into presentation mode to see how it looks. So we edited our background image in Photoshop. We created a logo from scratch in Illustrator. Never existed before, never going to exist again. Unless someone runs right out and gets that company going. We added some text to it and we arranged the elements together on the first page of our 480-page catalog. We got a lot of products coming. So again, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, we mostly looked at the ways in which they're different today. If we have a follow-up workshop, which we might depending on the needs of the class, as I said, we have a flexible schedule for the last few workshops, then what I'd love to be able to do is show you a little bit more about how they interrelate. But for now, you at least can see that that white area is actually right here. The white area is the finished product. The design. Together, in way less than 90 minutes. Let's actually call it like 75 minutes by the time we really got going. We created a new company. We named it. We came up with our core product. We found out how we could change photographs to sell our product in Photoshop. We designed a logo for our product that can be printed at any size. And we combined them and created a cover for a catalog.
And you also satisfied your quote at the beginning of the class.
Exactly.
Whimsical,
Thank you.
beautiful, emotional.
So let's read that quote again as we pack up. So you don't have to rush out of the room. I can answer questions. There's no other class coming in. I'm happy to stay at least until 5:30, 5:45, something like that. As you're packing up, I'd like to just give you a few other little tidbits about the interrelatedness of this and about graphic design. Does anyone have a question and have to run right away? Like really important to get your question answered and then no. Okay, so how about I'd just like to tell you a few other things about the graphic design process as you put your stuff together. How long do you think it takes the average new company to come up with a product, name their company, design a logo, create a catalog, build a website? Ballpark. Some of you have done it. A year for some, sure. Anyone think you could do it in a month? In a group of this size? Steve does. Steve's the optimist.
Well, if you
Maybe
have-
a month.
well,
Okay, so confident.
You could do it if you have a team.
If a team, if you have a team, you can run.
What if you only had a week?
And yourself?
Let's say 4 people.
And
how you
everybody
do
had
it.
different-
But Amber's obviously done this before. She's like, oh yeah, I gotta think of those
Well, no,
other
if
three
I didn't
people.
have, if we're talking like 16-hour days, didn't have anything else going on, focus, it could be done.
Okay, how about a day?
It would be a bare bones.
It's physically
What was
possible.
different about the process we went through, because we did it in less than 2 hours?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying it was great. It's not like I'm gonna add that logo to my portfolio tonight, folks. I mean, we're good, but we're not great. What was different? Why were we able to accomplish a ton? I mean, I didn't say you were all gonna individually create logos, and that's not realistic for a 90-minute workshop. But collectively, we did. How?
Because we had a leader or someone up here who was directing us.
Okay, I think that's part of it, having a leader that kind of directs you, but it has to be more than that. I mean, a lot of companies have a dynamic leader. What's different? Think back to the everyone standing up part.
We had a goal and deadline.
We had a goal, we had a deadline. Actually, you kind of had a soft deadline. I didn't say exactly how much time you had. You had a goal, that was one thing. What else?
We didn't have resistance, like we were moving in the same direction.
How did I ensure that as a leader?
But not allowed
You
to
involved
say
us all,
no.
you did symphony, you started us all out and, with.
That was one of the rules.
Yeah.
I remember I stated 3 or 4 rules. One of them was everyone is going to participate.
And everyone's gonna say yes.
But I also said, I didn't say you're all going to participate as much as you want. What did I say? One time, physically you sat down, you had contributed your part. What else? What are the words you had to
Yes.
start with?
Yes.
Yeah.
How often have you been in a meeting where everybody says yes?
Never.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, right? But look what you can accomplish
It's a great way
if everyone says yes. Maybe not the product you want, but you could go through the entire process and actually accomplish something. So think back to class, for those of you in ED 113 now, or the ones that took it before. How does that relate to the design process? What did we do today? Did we cover any of the design process? We have 3 or 4 different models that we've looked at, which is kind of driving me a bit
to.
crazy.
You did
Ideate.
whatever.
I think we did ideate. Does everyone agree that we ideated?
Ideated.
For those that even know what that is?
Yeah. And we also did empathy too,
How?
because we talked about oxygen and it's something that everybody can relate to somehow.
Everybody contributed. We had to actually empathize with who?
Each other.
You.
Yeah.
And you, and you, and you. So we got empathize, ideate, what else? Do we cover any of the other? Let's see, it's empathize, ideate,
Prototype.
prototype. Did we create a prototype?
And we kept going on.
Okay.
And on, yeah.
Anything else? Prototype. Some people use the word iteration, other people use edit or remix. Did we edit that logo? Did we go with the very first thing that I drew in Illustrator? Did we go with the second thing? We actually created 3 or 4 iterations of our logo. And then did we share or revise or revisit? My goal was to go through the entire design process as a team in a very short period of time, and I think I accomplished that. So as you're driving away, leaving, I think it would be great if you could reflect the ways in which we were able to create something not ready for market, but certainly a prototype that's understandable, that had at least aspired to being beautiful, probably whimsical, and emotionally engaging, because that's how you sell. If you hit those 3 things, then you're going to find customers. That's why we go to Whole Foods. So I'd rather buy my produce at Whole Foods than Walmart. There is stuff I buy at Walmart, just there's certain stuff I don't want to buy at Walmart. So just be thinking about how we go from this. So as you're doing your project, maybe if you were designing a workshop like I did today, so this is what the workshop looked like at 11 a.m. this morning. Remember, I said I wanted to be transparent about the process of creating a learning experience, right? So this is what this workshop looked like at about 11 o'clock this morning at a hostel downtown. But that's a lot to take in. A few of you wanted to grab the paper and kind of read through it. So I thought, how could I boil it down into something that would be a little bit easier to understand? So by about noon, I had this. So at about noon today, we have a different version. And what do we call it when we take a bunch of information and reduce it to a lot less? Don't say Steve Gordon. What do we call that? This is what it got boiled down to. And you're getting a sneak peek, actually, of what we're going to be covering on Monday night around visualization and doing mind mapping and concept mapping. Something that I use and Stacey uses all the time. So then what does this become? What's the next iteration of this? You see where I'm going, right? So this, at about 12:30, 12:45, starts to look like this. Actually, it didn't. I'm sorry. It looked like, I've edited it since then, unfortunately. It actually looked like this. But I thought, that's stylish, but it's not beautiful. How do I do something that's beautiful? And how do I add a level of sort of metaphor to it? If you remember from Whole New Mind, metaphors are really powerful. I think Daniel Pink is quoting someone or misquoting someone that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. Do you remember that? Those who read it? The idea that metaphors add this whole other level. So I thought, how could I represent that? Well, the idea of actually physically dragging them together to show you what's happening as they intersect and change color. As a teacher, I realized, oh, that's a great teaching moment because these are the 3 fundamental colors of the projector, the screen, your laptops, your phone, that are blending together to make all the other colors, right? So that's, let's say now we're up to 1 o'clock. Then I had to come here. So like I came over here, did all the stuff to be ready for the workshop, made sure the room was ready, that we had laptops. So now we're up to about 2 o'clock. What do I do at 2 o'clock? I realized, well, we need a website where people can go and download files. So this website didn't exist at 2 o'clock. Let's actually go to preview mode here. This is giving you a sneak peek at the web design workshop that we'll be doing in, I think, 3 or 4 weeks or something like that. There's a little trouble with the schedule right now, so I'll mention that. So if I preview that as... So, again, not a gorgeous website, but functional. I could give you a shortened URL, because I'm using Google Sites, which means it's a really long URL. I don't know why you have to say all that. But it allowed me to share files with you. In fact, not only the cardboard background, but I also put the presentation InDesign file. So if you want to download the InDesign file and mess around with it in InDesign to see how I used InDesign instead of PowerPoint or something else, I actually like to create my presentations right in InDesign. It lets me do all kinds of many things, like blend colors together. And I also have the PDF version of that presentation if you just wanted to review. There weren't that many slides, but I try to make everything available. And I'm going to be posting the video and audio and the screencast that I've been recording on this website. So as we meet together over the next 12 weeks, I've already created a page for each of the topics that we're going to be exploring. All the resources will be available on that page. And what you could do right now is there's a comments feature. So I said earlier that I was going to ask that everyone just put a couple words about the workshop. You can put a question in there. You can put how phenomenal an instructor I am, and that Harvard should hire me full time, not just to teach students or to teach teachers, but actually to teach the world how to sing in perfect font.